We have a couple of our Dixie State students here and then our now awesome med students at the U. So we've sent them a couple of questions and we want you guys kind of talk about your experience. We'll let it go with the flow. It's kind of a nonchalant thing that we wanted our students at Dixie to kind of interact with you guys. So thank you so much. And Mariah is really good at all this stuff. So I'm going to let her kind of start where she would like to go with that.
Yeah, I can moderate a little bit. Sorry, my voice is going out, but I think we can just start and introduce like all the med students, and you can just kind of say your name, what year you are, and then like your number one piece of advice for pre-med people. So I will go first. I'm Mariah. I'm a second-year medical student, and I think my number one piece of advice is two parts, and that's to have fun while you can. I don't think I ever regretted a snowboarding day in undergrad. And also, I kept like a really detailed like journal of all my experiences when I was in undergrad. I think that the RHS program told me to do that, and I kind of like took it into my own little journaling process, and I think that was so helpful for me in interviews. So my piece of advice is to just like write everything down. So yeah, we'll go around. Caden, do you want to go next?
Yeah. My name is Caden. I'm a second-year medical student at the U. And I guess my biggest advice is to try and chill out and be yourself. I remember that it was just so stressful. There's so much, and it's all okay. And you don't need to be as stressed as you are, probably. I didn't need to be. Yeah.
Sam, do you want to go?
I'm Sam. I am an MS1 this year. My piece of advice, I guess, would be just do what you enjoy. I know it's tempting. I did it as well, like just try to check boxes off to fill out your application, but it's way easier to write about stuff that you like actually really enjoyed. So
August, do you want to go?
Absolutely. I'm an MS2. I think that my piece of advice would be to get out and get some exercise, because St. George is a wonderful place and it is so cold up here and it's so much harder to get outside. So go enjoy St. George while you have it.
Love it. Jace, do you want to go?
I think Jace like put in the chat, he's like stepped away for just a little bit, then he'll be back.
Oh, thank you. I thought I saw his video. Jeff, go ahead.
All right, my name's Jeff. I'm a third-year medical student. It sounds like it's really far from where you guys are, but I promise it's not. I would say my two pieces of advice are, I agree with Mariah. Number one, like, don't take yourself too seriously. Like, do the things that you enjoy. Don't like make studying over the fun things that you're gonna do ever. And then number two, like, get a job in the medical field before medical school. Make sure this is something you want to do, because it is a grind and it's a long road. And if there's a lot of people who come to medical school and have no idea what they're getting themselves into. So I think exposure is probably my advice, my biggest piece of advice.
Awesome. Thank you guys for introducing yourselves. I know I sent Mariah a list of questions and maybe we could kind of round robin those, but then I also had a couple of other students send me a lot of questions. So would you guys prefer we kind of do Mariah's list and then we could go on to mine? Mariah, what do you think?
I feel like either way, I'm almost feeling like we should just open it up to students who are actually here to ask burning questions. And then when we have empty spaces, we can ask yours or the ones you sent me.
Perfect. Yeah, let's start with that then. So Johnny, Colton, Sheena, speak up, and Dresden, and Ashley.
Yeah, I know, guys, this can kind of be weird. Zoom just like sucks in general, but if we just sit here and like talk at you, it's gonna be awful. You got a pretty cool panel of people in front of you right now, who've all done some cool things, and all of us got into you, which seemed pretty intimidating when we were in your shoes. So just like any questions, stupid questions, whatever, like there's no such thing as something stupid. So just ask them all, okay?
I actually have a question. So what was, for those of you who have done clinical rotations or have had clinical experiences so far, what has been your like favorite? And I think that's, yeah.
I guess I should probably take that. So for those of you who don't know, I don't know what everybody's knowledge base of what medical school looks like is. So I'm just gonna, like, the first 2 years of medical school is basically just you're in a classroom, you're doing a lot of learning the science of medicine. You do have like clinical curriculum where you're learning how to do like a physical exam and how to take a detailed history and stuff like that. But third year and fourth year is when you really get your in clinical time. So ours has been shortened a little bit this year by a couple of weeks for each rotation, which I don't know, has kind of been good and bad. But I worked in the operating room in St. George when I was in undergrad, so I kind of fell in love with the operating room down there. So I've loved kind of anything that has been in the operating room for me. I don't think I'm going to do surgery, but I think anesthesia is something that I came in thinking I want to do, and I think that's still what I want to do. So I loved my anesthesia elective, but I also am enjoying internal medicine a lot more than I thought that I would. It's kind of a unique field where you really have to know all of your stuff. So it's been kind of a really cool rotation that way. I would say there hasn't been one that I've hated. It's all been like a really good experience, and it's nice to finally like get in the clinic. But surgery for me, I guess, is the short answer to that question.
Thank you.
I would just add like one thing that I'm stoked for third year. The second years here in the call got our third year schedules this week, and so we're all kind of stoked to move on to that from our more classroom based stuff. But I really appreciated at the U that they do like get you in working with patients pretty soon. Like we have a lot of community clinics that you can work in, and then which have been kind of halted because of COVID, unfortunately. But we're also in like small learning groups that we learn our clinical skills with, and we practice on standardized patients, and that's been just like really fun. It's my favorite class.
I have a question. So, I know that medical school can be so intimidating and there's so many information given to you all at once. I know I talked to August about this because I talked to August about everything. What are your advices on note-taking skills, and like what programs do you guys use to study? And what are your advices on test taking as well, like both of those questions?
I can go first. I know that between all of us here that we all have a lot of different things that we do. I don't take a lot of notes, but what I do take, it's on OneNote. I used Anki flashcards for the first little while, and I don't do that anymore, but I know a couple of people on this call use it pretty often. Anki's a flashcard app. If people don't know, it's very popular in med school. You'll hear all about it in your first week. But the cool thing about the University of Utah is you start out with foundations of medicine, and like all of the quizzes are formative, and so you don't get graded on the quizzes, just the final and a couple other assignments. So you really get a chance to try different things and see what works for you and what doesn't. So I changed my study habits a couple times in foundations, and even since then, just to kind of tweak what works. And everybody's going to have something different, but you're going to get overloaded with like resources and things on the first week that it's going to seem like there's so much. but you really just have to keep trying different things until you figure out what works best for you.
I'll go next. I too do not really take notes. I find it kind of distracting because when I'm trying to write stuff down, then I miss a lot of information. And so I really just try to absorb as much knowledge as possible that's being spewed at us. So I just engage fully with right now it's with the videos, but and all of the material really. So I do a lot of practice questions. I think that's where I really seal a lot of what I learn the most, but I really don't take a lot of notes.
I think like I'm thinking about like advice to give to you as an undergrad student, and I think it's super hard because I'm struggling. I think when I started med school, I switched to OneNote, and I think my advice would be like to try an online format first, because I think switching to OneNote and like using an Apple Pencil like really helped to like organize my notes, where in undergrad I was using like pen and paper, which seems like archaic to me now. I cannot believe that I did that, but it worked for me in undergrad, and then I switched to like an online format starting med school. And now my study strategy has kind of evolved over time to where I take hardly any notes, and I basically just like write things in first aid at this point, which is like a med school textbook resource that you'll get to know once you start med school. So I feel like just the more you learn about your style, the better, because everyone is different. Like, and so if you are doing pen and paper like I did, that's great. And I think it'll kind of naturally evolve in med school.
I think you just got to do whatever makes it stick in your head. Like, it's really hard because once you get into medical school, like everybody's going to have their own thing. And I like have to fight the temptation every day to like do something different just because someone else is like, everybody else is doing this thing. Like, I feel like I need to do it too. So that's just something you got to fight. Like for me, the way I do it, Caden mentioned Anki, and I use Anki like a little bit different than the way most people do. Like, the reason it helps me is like you can make your own flashcards, or you can kind of like unsuspend cards that other people have made. But I think it's the making them that helps me the most, because that's what sticks it in my head. Like I go and review them obviously, but it's the actual like trying to put it into English for myself to where I'll understand. And so like you don't have to use a flashcard app, but whatever helps you to like put it into terms that you'll be able to remember. Like some people draw pictures or whatever, things like that. And I think obviously you guys have gotten this far, you probably have good study habits already. So just stick with whatever you've been doing. That's kind of the rule I've been following. I kind of do the same thing I did in undergrad, and I'm still here now.
Is it Sheena? Is that how you say your name?
Yes.
Cool. What have you already taken the MCAT, or like where are you at in your like studying process?
I'm just studying right now for the MCAT, just practice questions.
Okay.
And yeah, so I'm applying probably 2022 because I want to go home in the Philippines. I'm international student, so.
Awesome. Yeah, I think I'm just going to kind of shortly echo what everybody else said. I think the name of the game is just spaced repetition. That's kind of how like the studies that have been done on learning, that's what they've come down to. And so however you can get spaced repetition that works for you, like that's what you should do. So for some people in medical school, we take a pile of like 2,000 flashcards that we've never looked at before, and we just start cranking through them even though we didn't write them. And some people can remember it that way. Some people feel like they need to write it themselves and it helps it stick better. Some people like drawing pictures. Some people take notes. Some people do practice questions, but it's just kind of a matter of getting that spaced repetition so that you can read something, learn it, and then come back to it over and over and over again. I think that's kind of been the key that I don't know, I've had to figure out how to do that for myself too. So I don't know if I have the perfect answer for you. There's another question in the chat. I'll just answer quick and then let you guys kind of go back through. Looks like Jonathan's asking about MMIs. So Jonathan, an MMI is basically just like you'll be face to face. I don't know if they'll still do it on Zoom or if they'll actually have you physically interview when you do it, but either way, you'll sit down with an individual. It might be one of the people that you're talking to right now, who will sit down in front of you, and you'll walk in a room. There'll be basically a piece of paper on the door, and you'll get to look at that piece of paper, think about the question for like 2 seconds, and then you get to walk in, and there'll be a person who's essentially going to interview you. They'll ask you the question again, and then you just kind of say your response. And so the questions are typically kind of like ethical questions, or I don't know, things that can kind of assess like your character and how good you are at making good decisions, things like that. So a common question is like, tell me about a time when you exhibited leadership skills or something like that. Or one will be like, they'll say like, a patient that you treated comes to the clinic and gives you a new car or something like that. Like, is it appropriate for you to accept that gift of a new car? Yes, no, like, and then explain your thought process behind it. And so then you get to kind of just talk to the interviewer, and they might ask a couple questions to kind of pick your brain, but that's the basic format. They're pretty quick. I can't remember. It was like 7 minutes, 8 minutes, 10 minutes. You guys remember?
I had 2 minutes to read the question, and then I think they give you like 7 minutes or 8 minutes to talk through it with your interviewer.
Yeah, and then you have 8 of those, and then that's just one component that goes into essentially the decision whether you get in or not.
If you do get offered an interview, you can definitely reach out to us again, though, and we can give you some of the little tips and tricks that we used, and kind of ways that we handled each question, things like that. But it's definitely a different type of interview experience, so being prepared for it's a good idea.
Kind of going off Johnny's question, how did you guys go about preparing for your interviews, or did you not prepare for them? Like, what was your strategy there?
Definitely prepare. I actually got a lot of help from Doug and like some other mentors at Dixie State. But Doug even set up, August and I did an MMI practice with Doug one day, like, because we had an interview. Our interview was like a week apart or something, which was awesome. But he got like another teacher at Dixie State to like simulate this whole thing. And we like knocked on their doors and like did the timing and everything. And that was the most helpful thing I did to prep for my interview. So any practice you can get is great.
Yeah, Doug has a list of questions that are pretty similar to some of the ones that we were asked. So that's a really good way to go about practicing for the MMIs, especially if you had like a teacher that you don't really know. Like, that would be a really great way to practice that and then get feedback. If you are preparing for an interview that's not an MMI though, I would recommend looking over your application beforehand and really making sure that you remember what you put down in your application and what you wrote in your secondary, because they will have that pulled up most likely and will ask you questions from your application and from your secondary. And so that's probably one of the ways to prepare for those kind of interviews, just a regular face-to-face.
So I have a question. I want to figure out like the timeline of everything. So I'll be taking the MCAT end of this spring and applying for med school. And then when are interviews? Are interviews over summer? How's that work? And then when do they let you know if you're in or not? Does that make sense?
That makes a lot of sense. So your timeline is basically you take the MCAT hopefully in May, and then you want to get your application in as like at the like as soon as it opens, you want your application to be in. That's a very key piece of information. So you need to be getting everything put together right now, your personal statement, like finalizing your application, getting everything done so that as soon as it opens, your application is in. Because I feel like that's like every admissions committee, like they'll tell you that's the number one like inhibiting factor is if you wait for a couple weeks or months, like your application just gets buried, and sometimes you don't get interviews just for that reason. So get it in on time, which is going to be in June. And then after that, you'll start getting emails back from the programs that you applied to, asking you to fill out secondaries. And for me, it pissed me off. I felt like it was just a way for them to take another $100 from me, or $60 or $80, because half the people who I did my secondaries to, I didn't even get an interview to. So it sucks, but it's just kind of part of the game. You got to pay the money to get the interview. And then people will start reaching out to you after they get your secondary application. And you'll start getting interview invites anywhere from late July at the earliest till all the way to like February, March of the following year. And then some schools will let you know immediately if you got in. If you're lucky, you'll know that like you'll get accepted to some schools in the fall. But some schools like the University of Utah lets like half of their matriculating students know that they're in like the first week of March or something like that. So it's kind of late and it kind of sucks, but it is what it is. So every program's different that way. Does that answer your question?
Yeah, and when does school start for you guys? June then?
The following June, August, yeah.
So technically, does that count as like a gap year anyways? Is that technically the gap year everyone talks about? Because you're waiting a year, because you graduate in spring, say, and then you wait a whole year just to matriculate into school. Wouldn't that just be a gap year? So is it gap year another year?
It depends how you do it. So the way that I did it, I wanted to avoid the gap year. And so I applied at the end of my junior year. So if you're ready to take your MCAT that early, you can do it that way. And then during your senior year of undergrad, you're interviewing. And so then so you would graduate in the spring after your interviews and then go straight to med school. So that's what I did. And you could do that if you're like on top of it and if you're ready to take the MCAT that soon. But if you graduate and then apply to med school, you would have a gap year, technically, when you're interviewing.
Mariah's flexing on me right now because I did it the other way, because I'm not as on top of things like Mariah.
Nah, Jeff dragged me through.
The only thing I wanted to add real quick with that whole process is to reach out to your letter writers really early, because that can be a big deal. Like it takes them a long time to write letters, and you don't want to be waiting on those when you're trying to submit your application. So identify possible letter writers right now, and then already start asking them if they'd be willing to write a letter for you.
I want to add two things as well. One, I definitely agree with all the things that have been said, but also don't stress about it. I took my MCAT June 2nd, and I turned my application in the first week of August, and I still got an interview and still got accepted. So I was very nervous to do it, I'll be honest, but I wasn't ready to take the MCAT in early May. So I studied the whole month of May and took it at the beginning of June. So it is scarier, that's for sure. There's a lot more stress with it, but it is possible. And the second caveat is I did the financial assistance, so all of my applications were covered, and most of the secondary applications honored the financial assistance if you did it through FAFSA or whatever, I can't remember, through AMCAS, there's a financial thing. I filled out all the paperwork, and I don't really remember their criteria. I think it's if you get the Pell Grant through FAFSA, then you qualify. So that's what I did, and I didn't have to pay for any of them, which was pretty nice.
I did mine kind of like August. You can submit your like primary application. It takes a few weeks to get like, I don't know what the word is, verified, I think. So I didn't take my MCAT till the middle of June, but I turned in my primary application like before I'd even got done my MCAT at all. And that's okay. The school just doesn't review your application until you get your MCAT in. So that's the way Doug told me to do it. So that's the way I did it. So maybe that's an idea if you want to kind of put off your MCAT, but you can still get it ready. So like the moment you get your score, it's already been verified and your score just gets tagged on there. And you can add schools after that too, like depending on your MCAT score, you just have to have at least one school that you submit it to at the beginning. I think for the other questions in the chat, for undergrad, I just did mine in biology. I minored in psychology and chemistry because they're basically like, if you might major in biology, you basically do the other things too. It just takes a couple more classes. But those are super helpful. I would encourage everyone to take Biochem 2 as well. Like you don't have to take Biochem 2, but like everything I learned in medical school, I swear came from Biochem 2. So that's my advice, take Biochem 2. But that's what I did, just biology. And that's what I was interested in. So a lot of people are like, oh, try something unique so you'll stand out. But that's what I love. So that's what I did. I wish Dr. Meyer was paying me. I need all the money I can get. And for letters of recommendation, I would say just get them from people who know you well. Like I got a letter from a doctor that I shadowed, but like, I don't know, we kind of knew each other, but not that great. And so I didn't even honestly send that letter to very many schools because I wasn't confident that it was like going to be a very strong letter. So just make sure you have people that you know well write you letters, and you don't have to absolutely have a letter from a physician. It's like I said, I didn't send a letter from a physician to the U and I got in, so.
What about letters from PAs? Because like there's a couple PAs up here that that told me that they would write me letters, but I don't know if that you know, because I have doctors that will write me letters too, but I'm wondering, like, would it make a difference if it's like from someone that's not just a physician? You know, if it's someone else too? I mean, I know that PAs are pretty much, I mean, in the same, working in the same capacity, but.
I think the person who's going to write you the best letter is the person you should ask. Some schools do, like I know DO schools, some DO schools will specifically want like a DO letter that you shadowed. And so if that's the case, then you should make sure that your letter writer has like the qualifications that the school wants. But beyond that, I don't think schools really care what like level, for lack of better term, your letter writers are. Like I worked with a nurse really closely for a long time, and she wrote one of my letters for the U, and she wrote me a really strong letter. I've never read it, but I assume she did. And that was great. So I think as long as that person's going to write you a strong letter, that's who you should ask, unless the school's asking for like a physician specifically.
Yeah, there are a couple schools that I applied to that really wanted a physician letter. And so you want to make sure that you have what they're asking for. But other than that, like everyone else said, whoever knows you the best.
And when are we going to see you guys start coming through the ER?
I forgot you were up here, Jess. That's awesome. Hopefully soon.
Do you work at the ER at the U?
Yeah, that's where I am right now. See, you guys probably recognize this. That's like.
I do recognize that. We don't do we do like some clinical stuff through the ER, but it's not one of our required rotations. So it's the select that you can pick to do, but I don't know. Everybody gets to visit there. In answer to Ashley's question, I worked as an orderly in the operating room at Dixie Regional. Well, I guess St. George Regional now. And I thought that was like the best job ever for an undergrad wanting to go to medical school. Other jobs that I think would be really great experiences, like being an MA for somebody in their clinic. I don't know. There's I mean, even like CNA, like just having exposure in the field and working in it, even if it's just like a PRN type of job, so that you can accommodate like undergrad school still. Like I think that's a great idea that people that committees always appreciate.
Just to take some of the stress off, I lived on student loans and I didn't work in undergrad. So I got all of my exposure through shadowing physicians. So I actually saw Jeff in the OR a few times when I was working with Dr. Whiting. So don't stress too much about it. Just do what you're passionate about.
I had a question sent in that I thought, well, I also want to ask it, but kind of a lot of us that are applying this cycle are starting to, go think about why of everything, like personal statement writing and writing for our applications. What was most helpful to you guys when you were writing your like essays and stuff, and what do you wish you did better?
I feel like it's so hard to look back now because I've like learned so much and come so far in the last like year and a half that like a lot of my reasons for doing medicine have like changed a little bit. And so I think it's a hard question because what I know now I didn't know then. And so like that's just kind of how life is. But I think that like just the more writing you can do and the more reflection you can do now will make it easier as you start to like put it together into a personal statement.
Yeah. For me, in writing my personal statement, I figured out what all of my 15 experiences were, and I kind of had been keeping a journal of what I did and knew what I was going to be writing about. And there were a couple trends in my experiences, like what I enjoyed doing for service and what I did for work, and I tried to incorporate that into my personal statement and why I want to go into medicine, so that it came across as like that I am passionate about these things and this is what I'm going to bring to medicine. And so like I think a lot of people have touched on it, but like being who you are and being yourself and not trying to be like all the people that you think you need to be like that are getting into medicine and going into medical school. Because they're going to see that and they're going to be able to tell that you are what you are passionate about and what drives you. And like Mariah said, that'll probably change, but for now, like I would stick with that. Like make sure you know what you like and write about that.
When you start your writing process, it's honestly pretty scary because you feel like med schools want to see a particular thing. And right before we started writing all of our applications, we actually met with Jeff. So he had just gotten accepted, and he gave us some really good advice. And it's that they want to see you and who you are as a person. So make sure that you're writing that and not what you think they want to see.
I had another student just text me a question. They were just wondering, besides clinical experience and experience with patients, what did you guys do for volunteering, and how important do you think that was later on? Just because their story is that they did most of their volunteering earlier on in school in their undergrad, and now they're kind of focusing more on research and tests and stuff. Do they want to see, would you want to continue doing that, or would you prioritize, studying for the MCAT over volunteering?
I don't know if you guys will get the chance, but Dr. Chan came and did like a little sit down with us before we applied, which was really helpful. And I remember the one thing that he told us, besides like trying to get as good of an MCAT score as you can, he said the most important thing that they look at is volunteer hours. I had like 2,000 hours already and asked what I should do, and he said get more hours. And so I'd say volunteer, especially for the U, is extremely important. They're very service oriented. It's going to be different for different places where you apply. Like another school I applied to told me I didn't get an interview because I didn't have enough research, even though I had a couple research experiences. So it depends on the institution you're going to go to, kind of, but volunteering is extremely important. And something I didn't know, but when you go to apply to residencies, now. A lot of that stuff that you're doing is volunteering, can go on your application for residencies as well, the stuff that you're doing now. So find something that you really enjoy doing and keep doing that. Like I'm getting back involved. I did Big Brothers Big Sisters, which was something I'm really passionate about. And so now I'm trying to continue that in medical school. So I have this like really long longitudinal service that shows that I really am passionate about youth and helping my community out. So that's something that I would really definitely get as much service as you can, and find something you really like and try to keep doing that.
Do you guys do research in while you're in medical school? Then do you do very much research or not really?
I've done zero, but lots of people do.
Yeah, this is a very subjective question. I'm laughing because at the beginning of medical school, you just get like overwhelmed with like kind of how you guys feel right now about like getting into medical school, like all of us are feeling about getting into residency. So just know that it's not quite over when you get into medical school. So if you're coming into medical school and you want to be like a neurosurgeon and you're just hell bent on being a neurosurgeon or like a cardiothoracic surgeon or something, like you're gonna have to get on the research game like early, and find a good research mentor and start like getting on papers. I think for everybody who's in medical school, it's a good idea to be on, at least a project or two at some point in medical school. But there's a lot of people who don't do any research at all. There's just kind of the whole spectrum, the same as it is to get into medical school, is what's happening while you're in. So I don't know.
I disagree with Caden and Jeff. Just kidding. I don't quite disagree, but I would say that Doug is going to be your greatest resource when you're like looking at your specific application and seeing if you should be doing like more volunteer work. But I do think that there is like kind of a natural flow as you go through undergrad where like if you focus on volunteer work kind of at the beginning, that kind of helps you focus maybe more on research and like studying for the MCAT at the end. And so I think there is like a natural flow where you kind of are doing more of one thing or more of another thing in undergrad to make sure that you're well-rounded and ready to apply. So I would say with like specific, like what does my application look like and do I need more volunteer work questions, I would say to like have someone actually look at what you have, like Doug. And then yeah, I think that the pre-med hustle gets better in med school. It's definitely more focused on what you're passionate about and your time is much more limited. And so the U is very adamant about making sure that you know that you don't just like add hours in medical school for any reason. You only do things that you really care about for your residency application. So those are my disagreements with Caden and Jeff.
Get out of here.
Well, so my question about the research is because there's a lot of residents that I work with and stuff that they are, doing research during residency just so they can get into the fellowship they want. But it's like, are you guys, do you not have to do the research to get into the residency you want to?
No, you do. You need research to get into good residency programs. It's just, there's a spectrum of what residency programs are looking for. If you're going to go to a big academic institution like Johns Hopkins or Mayo Clinic or UCLA or, San Francisco, like you're going to need to publish a lot of papers to get into residency there because they really value research. If you want to go to a residency program and be like an ER physician at a community hospital, in middle of nowhere California or back east somewhere, like you probably aren't going to have research. Like they won't care. Just kind of depends on what programs you're looking to get into, and that will kind of come when you get into medical school, kind of understanding that whole game more than anything.
Yeah, the U specifically does have I think it's pretty, if you want research at the U, it's easy to get. It's been really cool to kind of utilize their resources. And between like your first and second year, you have the summer off, and they have a medical student research program that you can do where you can do like 10 weeks of research. So Jason and I did that, and it was great. So I think once you get into med school, like getting research experience, if you want it, is like pretty easy.
I'd say a lot of this stuff you can just wait till you get in, because like in medical school, there's, especially at the U, I don't know how other medical schools are, but there's so many people like trying to help you. And like the first week of medical school, they like give you a list of like everyone who's there to help you and when you should talk to them and about what. And then they send you resources so you can remember that stuff, because you don't really remember anything from your first week. But I swear I get like 5 emails a day of the U like offering stuff to help me succeed. So you don't have to worry about like figuring it out now. Once you get there, you're going to get it all figured out. There's all sorts of people. They're going to have very specific jobs in helping you get into residency and stuff like that. So that probably doesn't answer your question, but I would just say don't really worry too much about it, because once you get there, they're going to help you figure it out.
Okay, there's a pretty long question in the chat from Colton asking about, would you guys suggest including experiences that we have lined up for after we submit our applications as one of our 15 experiences? So some people have told him to wait and put them on secondary applications, and somebody else said that they did that and only had the opportunity to include 3 of their 15. So kind of about the activities.
I can address that real quick. So I had a summer internship that I did the summer that I applied to med school, so I did not include that in my application. But I had plenty of opportunities to talk about it on my interviews, so to me it wasn't a big deal. I mean, I don't think it'll matter that much one way or another. You'll have an opportunity to talk about it. If it's not in the secondary, it'll be during the interview.
Yeah, I think like I also did something that same summer that I applied, but it was like halfway through the experience, and so I did include it on my 15 experiences, but I only put the hours that I had already completed on that. So if you're applying June 1st or whatever, anything you've done prior to June 1st, you can put like hour amounts on and say like you're still doing it, it's ongoing. I wouldn't put any like future things in. I definitely did like a lot of research my senior year, which was during my interview cycle. And even though they didn't come up on secondaries, I talked about them in interviews. So yeah, same as Jace.
Yeah, I second, third, all of their ideas. Like I don't think it's a good idea to write about something you haven't done yet, just to fill up a space. I don't think it's pretty frowned upon, really.
I definitely wouldn't write anything to fill up a space like everyone else has said, but I did include something that was happening in the future because of how big it was. Like I helped start Camp Kesem, and Camp Kesem, the first year we were there was my senior year, which is after we applied. So I included that because it was a pretty big deal for Dixie. It was a pretty big deal for what I'm passionate about and things like that.
But August also did a lot of work up and before Camp Kesem started in like getting it done at Dixie. So I think that's definitely like, I can see why he put that on. Like he spent a lot of work campaigning to get it so that we did get Camp Kesem.
On that note, with your guys' 15 experiences, did you fill all of them? I know it's kind of a specific question for your application, but did you fill all of them or did you leave some blank? And if so, do you feel like that strengthened or weakened your application?
I was just about to say that I think on my application, I only filled out like 12 experiences for the 15. But I think the reason it worked out for me, a lot of mine were like really long, like a year or more. Probably 5 or 6 of mine were like multiple year experiences. So I wasn't too worried about just trying to fill in the box with like little things that I did. So you don't have to fill out all 15. Obviously more is better than less. But like I said, I think I only had 12. I might have had 13, but I definitely didn't have 15. And it still worked out. As long as you can write strongly about the stuff that you did, that's going to stick out more to them than the actual number of things that you did.
Yeah, I think the general good advice is obviously those, like, there's 15 spots there for a reason. Like, they want you to use them, but more importantly, they want it to be meaningful. So like, if you can fill them with 15 things, check your boxes, but also like have them be meaningful. Like, that's the ideal situation. I don't know, when you get into medical school, like, we have this advisor, he's the dean of our school, and he preaches to us all the time, like, you need to build your brand, right? And so like the people who are really successful through med school, I feel like, are the ones who have figured that out even in undergrad. And so if you can get involved in things that you're passionate about and things that you like starting in undergrad, and then kind of continue that on through medical school, like, that's just gonna set you up for success, like, all the way down the line, because like, you'll have a lot of things to talk about. It'll, like, using your time in those things won't feel draining, and you will do a lot less of just like box checking, just to get into, just to qualify for whatever you're trying to get into. So like, for me, I love basketball. I love doing a lot of things outside, and so like, those are kind of like parts of my theme that I've tried to incorporate. So I did a lot of volunteering with like I was a basketball coach in undergrad for the city team there for a couple years. I've done a lot of volunteering with like outdoor groups. There's a nonprofit in St. George called Get Outside, that I actually took my summer between first and second year of medical school to, like, the guy actually let me direct the nonprofit. And so like, that was something there. So just like, if you can start filling those boxes with things that are meaningful now, like, that's just going to serve you in the long run, I guess, is what I'm trying to say.
So another question I got on that front was, how did you go about picking your 3 most meaningful experiences? And yeah, that was it.
I'll take a stab at this one. So I wrote, I started by writing down all of the things that I wanted the University of Utah to know about me. And I ended up with 18 things. So then I had to decide which ones were the most meaningful to me. And then I cut that back to 15. And then I wrote all 15 of them, just the bare minimum. And then I said, which of these experiences which ones am I dying to write more about? And those were the ones that to me were the most meaningful. So like, Camp Kesem was one of them. I wanted to write a lot more about that one because it was something I was so passionate about, and I wanted them to know that. So that's kind of how I did it.
For me, I just started writing about each of my experiences, and just naturally, whatever one I started writing more about, like, it was easier for me to talk about, I just chose that. Like, there wasn't like there wasn't a lot of thought that went into it. It's just like, it was easy for me to talk about this, so I'm just going to keep talking about it. And then it ended up being my longer, most meaningful activity.
I agree. The ones that I was like, this is not enough space to write about this experience, like, those are the ones that became my 3 most important.
I will say here, I'm just going to give a little caveat. If you are Mormon and you went on a mission, I would not pick your mission as one of your most meaningful experiences, especially if you're applying to the University of Utah. For most of the people applying to medical school, the mission was like 4, sometimes 5 years before your application. I served a mission. It was a very meaningful experience to me. But it was so far in the past, and I had done a lot of other meaningful things that I think that was much better use of one of my spots to pick something that was more recent, and that I kind of showed that I continued things that I started on my mission rather than trying to live 5 years prior.
Another question that I had from a student on our Instagram was asking about how did you guys go about financing your application process? I know a lot of people worked or had loans or scholarships, and then there's like the FAFSA thing, but what did you find most helpful as a resource? Was it Doug, or was there like a website that you guys referenced a lot?
Credit card sign-up bonuses. I applied to like 5 credit cards and they all had sign-up bonuses, and then I used those to pay for the flights for interviews or secondary fees. And then you get like another $300 every time you do that. I mean, it worked. It was something.
Jace also lived off of like peanut butter strictly for like 3 years. Okay, so take that with a grain of salt.
I like Mariah's answer in the chat, tax returns. That's a good one.
I actually, yeah, I take maybe like 10% of Jace's financial advice. We talked about it a lot in undergrad, and the tax return was one of those things that I took, and it paid for a big chunk of my application. But I also did take out a loan my senior year at Dixie just for like flights and applications. And like, I just kind of saw that as like a drop in the bucket of what was coming, which was med school loans. So I think that there's no shame in just like taking what you need so you can be successful.
Especially if you qualify for subsidized loans, I would definitely take those out if you can get any more of that money, because you don't have to pay any interest on that until after you graduate med school. So
Okay, I think that was the end of the questions that I had. Does anybody, student-wise, undergrad, have any prying questions they have left to ask our students before they depart? Because I don't want to take you guys' time too much. Okay, with that, I would love if like each of you med students could like give one last tidbit of advice before you leave, and then we could just, say adieu after that.
I'll leave my email in the chat. You guys are welcome to email me. If there's anybody in here who is looking for like a job or wants me to send them to the manager of the OR in St. George, I'm happy to line that up. They usually have orderly positions available there. I know that for sure. But again, I'm just going to kind of reiterate the things I've already said. We're pulling for you. First of all, everybody here, like, I guess I won't speak for them, but I'm pulling for you. I have a lot of fond feelings towards Dixie, and especially Doug. Like, I don't know, I love St. George. And so I think it's really cool. Like when I found out that there was so many kids or so many students that got in after me, and then, it's continued that like more people were getting in from Dixie, I was pumped about it. So just keep going. It's really rewarding. It's a lot of work, but it's worth it in the end. So.
I would say my last bit of advice is kind of the same, and that's just to utilize the resources that Dixie State has. I think as a smaller school, if you can take advantage of that like one-on-one treatment that you get at Dixie State, it'll really work to your advantage. Yeah, so use the resources that you have, use Doug, use the RHS department, use like the professors who are super awesome about one-on-one research stuff, and have fun while you can. I'm in the middle of the second year sludge, so I'm just wishing all the outdoor funness on you guys.
I think my biggest piece of advice would be right along with what Mariah said, and it's enjoy the journey. Have fun while you can. Have fun forever, because it's like we both said, it's the journey. So enjoy it.
Thank you, Jeff.
Yeah, I guess my advice is everything up into medical school and as you continue is tough. There's a lot of hard times ahead, but there's a lot of really awesome times ahead as well. Stuff that like we're just only in classroom right now, but Jeff started rotations and we get to start rotations next year, some of us, and like it's pretty awesome. And just a couple days ago, we do ELOs, which are inpatient like learning opportunities, and so I got to go and sit with a patient and talk about them and act like I was a doctor for a couple minutes, and it was really cool. Like to be in there sitting in the hospital with a patient on your own, performing physical exams on them and like doing real stuff. Like just knowing that that's in the future makes all of the crap that you kind of have to go through and applying and jumping through the hoops worth it.
I guess my only advice to add to that is just don't abandon your hobbies. There's life outside of medicine, so prioritize that a lot of times because it can be pretty draining, this whole process.
I would say just believe in yourself, really. You just take it one day at a time. It's like a huge goal. And I always thought there was no way, but I don't know, it's what I wanted to do. So I just took it one day at a time, and things come up and you just roll with it, and you'll get there eventually. And you'll get that call from Dr. Chan. Don't be scared of Dr. Chan. He's literally like the greatest human being I ever know. He's my core faculty guy here at the U, so I get to see him every week, and he is literally so hilarious. But good luck, guys. You'll make it.
I also want to add one more thing, and that's rely on each other, be there for each other, because Mariah, Caden, Jace, and I pretty much took every single class in undergrad together. We saw Sam a few times too, which is pretty cool. But having each other through the journey was very helpful. Jace constantly reminded us about any scholarship opportunities. Mariah and Caden carried me through undergrad, so rely on them.
Well, thank you all again. You guys are, oh, that was to each other. I was like, oh, okay. Thank you guys all again for coming. Whoever, all their emails are in the chat, and I could reach out to Mariah if anybody else. Oh, thanks, Mariah. If anybody else has any questions, please feel free to contact me. Undergrads, I could put you into contact with them as well. But again, thank you guys so much for taking time out of your busy schedules of studying to talk to us. So
thanks for having us. We love this.
Okay, we should try to do it again maybe, but I'll talk to Doug before we do. So, okay, alrighty, thank you all so much.